An 8-year-old boy made a life-changing decision when he called 911 after hearing his sister's cries for help. But what happens next will leave you speechless. Could one brave act really be enough to stop a hidden danger? Lucas, an 8-year-old boy, sat on the floor of his room, carefully arranging his action figures and toy cars. His favorite toys were a red race car, a green truck, and a blue sports car. He lined them up neatly on the floor, making sure each one was in the right spot. The autumn breeze flowed through the open window, rustling the leaves in the trees outside. The quiet sound of the leaves moving made the afternoon feel peaceful. The sun shone softly through the window, casting long shadows across the blue carpet. Lucas liked to take his time arranging his toys, making sure everything was perfect. He didn't mind spending hours in his room, lost in his world of cars and action figures. The room felt safe, and the gentle breeze made it even more comfortable. It was one of those afternoons when everything seemed calm and right. From downstairs, Lucas could hear his stepfather, John, moving around in the kitchen. The sound of pots and pans clinking together reached Lucas's ears. John was always busy, cooking dinner or doing something else around the house. Lucas didn't mind it too much, but he knew John wasn't the same as he used to be. Lately, things had felt tense at home. As Lucas arranged his toys, he heard the familiar footsteps of his older sister, Lily, walking past his door. She didn't stop to say hello, and he noticed she seemed to be moving slower than usual. Lucas wondered what was wrong, but he didn't know what to do. He just kept playing with his toys, hoping that everything would be okay. Lily used to be the kind of sister who loved to play with Lucas. She would read him stories, help him with his homework, and even make up games for them to play together. She had a bright, happy smile and was always full of energy. But things had changed over the past year. Ever since their mom, Grace, married John, Lily didn't seem the same. She spent most of her time in her room with the door closed. She didn't talk much anymore, and when she did, her voice sounded tired and sad. Lucas missed the old Lily, the one who used to sing loudly in the car or tell funny stories. Now she rarely smiled, and when she did, it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't even want to play with him anymore, and that made Lucas feel alone. He often found himself sitting in his room, surrounded by his toys, wondering what had happened to his sister. John, their stepfather, didn't help the situation. He was the complete opposite of what Lucas imagined a dad would be. At first, John had seemed friendly and kind. He would joke with Lucas, ask him about his day at school, and sometimes even join in when Lucas was playing with his toys. But things changed after they moved into the new house. John became more distant, and when he spoke to Lily, it was always with an edge in his voice. He would tell her to do things in a harsh tone, and if she didn't do them quickly enough, he would get angry. "Why are you always so slow?" John would snap. "Can't you do anything right?" Lily would shrink under his words, her shoulders slumping, her eyes avoiding his. It was like she became smaller every day, hiding away from his criticism. She would apologize, but it didn't seem to make John any less angry. Lucas could see it happening, and he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't understand why John treated Lily like that, but he could feel the tension in the air every time they all sat down for dinner or tried to do something together as a family. Sometimes, when they were all together in the living room, Lucas would see Lily sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, barely looking up from her phone. She never laughed at the jokes Lucas made anymore. She didn't play music in her room or sing along like she used to. It was as if the light inside her had faded, and there was only a shadow left. John would often yell at Lily for small things like not setting the table fast enough or getting a bad grade at school. He didn't seem to understand that Lily was trying her best, or maybe he didn't care. It was hard for Lucas to watch, but whenever he tried to speak up or tell John to stop, he was quickly silenced. John would give him a stern look, and Lucas knew better than to argue. He felt caught in the middle, unsure of what to do. The atmosphere at home grew heavier every day. Lucas could feel the tension between John and Lily, and even though his mom, Grace, was there, she was often too tired after work to notice the little things. She didn't see how Lily seemed more distant, or how John's anger seemed to grow every day. Grace was focused on her job, trying to take care of the family, but sometimes it felt like she didn't have the energy to see what was really happening at home. Lucas wished things could go back to the way they used to be, when he and Lily would laugh and play together. He didn't understand why things had changed, but he knew it wasn't right. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt cold, like there was a cloud hanging over them all the time. Lucas didn't know how to bring the light back, but he couldn't help feeling that something needed to change. As the evening wore on, Lucas began to feel more and more uncomfortable. He had always known that John's words to Lily were harsh, but tonight something felt different. Lucas could hear John yelling at Lily from downstairs. He was angry as usual, but his voice was sharper, more cutting than before. "Why can't you just do it right? Every time I ask you to do something, you mess it up." John's voice echoed through the house, and Lucas could hear the sound of things being slammed around in the kitchen. Lily's voice was barely audible, apologizing softly, but John wasn't listening. He never really listened. Lucas could feel the tension in the air. He could hear Lily's footsteps moving quietly as she hurried to do whatever John told her soft breathing the only sound in the house aside from John's angry rants. Lucas stayed in his room, but he couldn't focus on his toys anymore. His thoughts kept drifting back to his sister and the way she seemed to shrink every time John spoke to her. Later that night, as the house settled into its usual silence, Lucas heard something that made his heart skip a beat. It wasn't the usual quiet of the house. This was different. From the walls he could hear Lily's breathing. But this time it was shaky, uneven, like she was trying to keep herself quiet. The kind of breathing that told Lucas something was wrong. Lucas stood up from his bed, his small feet barely making a sound on the carpet as he walked to the door. He pressed his ear against the wall, straining to hear. He could hear Lily softly crying, trying not to make a noise. His chest tightened. His mind raced with thoughts of what could be happening in her room. Lily hadn't been the same for weeks. Lucas could tell that she was trying to hide something, but what? Why didn't she talk to anyone about what was happening? He couldn't bear the thought of her being in pain, all alone, without anyone to help her. He knew something had to be wrong, but he didn't know what to do. As he stood in the hallway, Lucas remembered something Miss Collins, his second-grade teacher, had taught them during a safety lesson. She had told the class that if they ever heard or saw something bad happening, if someone was in danger, they should call 911. "The police are there to help," Miss Collins had said. "You have to speak up. Don't keep it to yourself." Lucas's heart raced as he thought about what he had to do. He didn't want to make things worse, but he couldn't ignore it any longer. If Lily was in trouble, if she was hurting, he had to help her. He couldn't just sit by and do nothing. With trembling hands, Lucas walked quietly to the kitchen, where he knew the old phone was kept in the drawer. The house was so quiet now, but the air felt thick, like something was about to happen. His mind kept racing back to the sounds he had heard coming from Lily's room. The soft cries. The shaky breath. His heart ached for his sister, and he knew he couldn't wait any longer. Lucas opened the drawer, his small fingers gripping the cold, plastic phone. His palms were sweating and his mind was spinning. What if he was wrong? What if he made a mistake? But then he remembered Miss Collins's words again. If someone is in danger, you need to call. He dialed the number, his hands shaking as the phone rang. The operator answered, and Lucas, barely able to speak above a whisper, told them that his sister was in trouble. He told them everything he had heard, everything he had seen. And as the operator assured him that help was on the way, Lucas's heart began to slow, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, he had done the right thing. He only hoped it wouldn't be too late. Lucas was standing in the hallway trying to quiet his breathing, when suddenly he heard a loud crash from upstairs. The sound echoed through the house, followed by a sharp cry from Lily. Lucas's heart stopped for a moment and his body froze. He knew that cry. It wasn't just a sound of surprise or frustration. It was the kind of cry that came from pain. Lily had never cried like that before. Lucas had heard her cry, of course, but never like this. This cry was full of fear and hurt, and it made his chest tighten. His stomach twisted with worry. Something was terribly wrong. He had to help her. His mind raced, and then he remembered what Miss Collins had told them in class. If you hear someone in danger, you need to call 911. The police would come and help. The words repeated in his mind over and over again. He couldn't wait any longer. If Lily was hurt, if she was really in danger, he had to do something. Shaking with fear, Lucas quickly walked to the kitchen. His hands felt clammy as he reached for the phone. He had never called 911 before, and his heart was racing. What if he made a mistake? What if he said the wrong thing? But there was no time to think about that. He needed to help Lily. Lucas picked up the old phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The phone seemed to weigh a ton in his hand. He held his breath as the phone rang, each second feeling like an eternity. He could still hear the sounds from upstairs, Lily's cry, John's angry voice, and then the silence that followed. The silence was worse than the noise because it made Lucas think that something terrible had happened. Finally, the phone was answered. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice asked. Lucas could barely speak. His voice shook as he answered. It's my sister. She's in trouble. I think she's getting hurt. My stepdad John, he's hurting her. The operator's voice was kind but firm. Okay, stay calm. We're sending help. Can you tell me your name and address? Lucas, Lucas Baker. We live at 247 Maple Lane, Lucas managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel the fear bubbling up inside him, but he pushed it back. He had to stay strong for Lily. Good job, Lucas. You're being very brave. Stay on the phone with me until the police arrive. Can you tell me what's going on? Lucas quickly explained what he had heard. John yelling at Lily, the crash, and then her cry. I think she's hurt, Lucas said, his voice breaking. I don't know what to do. The operator's voice softened. You're doing the right thing by calling. Help is on the way, Lucas. Just stay where you are and don't go into the room. We need to make sure you're safe too. Lucas nodded even though the operator couldn't see him. He stayed on the line, listening to the quiet in the house, his heart pounding. It felt like forever before he heard the sound of sirens outside, getting louder and louder. They're here, Lucas, the operator said. The police are on their way inside now. You did great. Just hearing those words made Lucas feel like a weight had been lifted off his chest. Help was here. The police would make sure Lily was safe. He had done the right thing. He had saved his sister. As the sirens grew louder, Lucas's hand tightened around the phone. He stayed where he was, waiting for the officers to arrive and for his family's life to change forever. The sound of sirens grew louder and louder until they stopped right in front of the house. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he waited in the kitchen. He could hear the police officers outside, shouting orders to each other. The front door slammed open, and within seconds, the house was filled with the sound of heavy boots pounding on the floor. The police had arrived. Lucas heard the officers shouting commands. Police, everyone stay where you are. Then there was a loud crash, followed by voices shouting at John. Get down. Hands where we can see them. Lucas peeked through the kitchen doorway, watching as the police rushed into the living room. John, who had been standing by the door, tried to act calm, but the officers were too fast. Before he could say anything, two police officers grabbed him by the arms and pushed him to the floor. He struggled, but the officers were too strong. They quickly handcuffed him and started to lead him out of the house. John tried to speak, his voice shaking, but the officers weren't listening. This is a mistake, he yelled. I didn't do anything wrong. Lucas felt a sense of relief wash over him as he saw John being taken away. He had helped make this happen. It was over. While the police dealt with John, two paramedics rushed upstairs. Lucas could hear the sound of their footsteps as they quickly moved through the house. The minutes felt like hours, but finally the paramedics came back downstairs, their faces serious. One of the paramedics walked over to Lucas, who was still standing in the kitchen, watching everything unfold. Is your sister okay? The paramedic asked. Lucas shook his head. I don't know. She was crying. I think she's really hurt. The paramedic nodded and called over to the police officers. We need to get her to the hospital. She's got visible bruises and she's really upset. We need to check her out. Lucas felt his stomach drop. He knew Lily had been hurt, but hearing that she had bruises made it even harder to bear. He thought about her sitting in her room trying to stay quiet, hoping someone would help her. He had done that for her. He had called 911, and now she was getting the help she needed. As the paramedics took Lily out on a stretcher, Lucas stood frozen, his mind racing. Then Officer Mike walked over to him, his expression softening as he knelt down to Lucas's level. You did the right thing, son, Officer Mike said gently. You were very brave to call 911 and tell us what was happening. You helped save your sister. Lucas looked up at the officer, his heart still racing. He wasn't sure how to feel. He was relieved that Lily was getting help, but he also felt scared and confused. Officer Mike placed a hand on his shoulder. You helped us understand what John was doing, the officer continued. Your bravery made a big difference. You're a hero today, Lucas. Lucas felt a warm feeling spread through him. For the first time that night he felt proud of himself. He had been scared, but he had done the right thing. He had saved Lily and now she was going to be okay. As the police and paramedics finished their work, Lucas sat down on the couch, still trying to process everything. But deep down he knew that he had done something important. He had spoken up, and because of that, his sister was going to be safe. And that made everything worth it. After the police arrested John, things moved quickly. The investigation began immediately, and the truth started to come out. The police talked to teachers, neighbors, and anyone who had known John. They discovered a long history of abuse. It wasn't just happening at home. John had been emotionally and physically hurting students at the schools where he worked. Teachers and colleagues came forward, sharing what they knew about his behavior. They spoke about how John would pick on certain students, especially those who seemed vulnerable. He would use his position as a teacher to manipulate and control them. Many students had complained, but they were often too afraid to speak up. John knew how to charm the adults around him, and he used his nice guy act to cover up his cruelty. He would offer extra help with homework, volunteer to take kids on field trips, and act like the perfect teacher. But behind closed doors he was a different person. The more the investigation uncovered, the clearer it became that John had been hiding his abusive behavior for years. His actions had gone unnoticed because he knew exactly how to manipulate the situation. The police also found out that John had transferred from school to school whenever people started asking questions about his behavior. Each time he would leave and find a new place to work, avoiding any serious consequences. Meanwhile, at home, Grace was beginning to understand the full extent of what had been happening. She had always trusted John and never thought he was capable of hurting her children. But now the truth hit her like a punch to the gut. She had missed the signs. She had been so focused on her work at the hospital that she hadn't seen how John was treating her family. The realization crushed her. She felt guilty, angry, and heartbroken all at once. But she also knew she had to take action to protect her children. Grace decided to file for divorce. It was the hardest decision she had ever made, but she knew it was the right one. She couldn't let John hurt her children anymore. She also agreed to therapy for both Lucas and Lily. She wanted them to heal, to feel safe again. Grace knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to give them the support they needed to get through this difficult time. The community, shocked by the news of John's arrest, began to rally around the Baker family. Neighbors brought over meals and friends reached out to offer help. People who had known Grace for years, and even some who had only met her recently, came forward with words of support. They expressed their sympathy and offered to help in any way they could. It felt good for Grace to know that she wasn't alone in this. The kindness from others helped lift some of the weight she had been carrying. As the investigation continued, Grace began to feel a sense of hope. She knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey for her family, but with the support of the community and the therapy sessions for Lucas and Lily, she believed they would eventually heal. It wouldn't be easy, but Grace was determined to make sure her children were safe, loved, and supported as they moved forward. They would rebuild their lives one step at a time, and nothing could ever take away their strength. The day of the trial finally arrived, and the courtroom was filled with tension. Grace sat nervously in the front row, holding Lily's hand as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Lucas, who was sitting beside them, felt a mix of fear and hope. He had told his story to the police, and now it was time for John to face the consequences of his actions. John was in the courtroom, sitting with his lawyer, trying to maintain his calm. He looked different without his usual teacher clothes, his face pale and tired. His once confident demeanor was now replaced by an air of uncertainty. He had tried to deny everything, saying he was innocent, but the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies from teachers, the bruises on Lily, and the emotional damage they had all suffered spoke louder than his lies. After a long, intense trial, the judge delivered the verdict. John was found guilty of abuse and sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge's words echoed through the room, Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her. Lily squeezed her hand and Lucas smiled softly. They were free. John would never be able to hurt them again. As the police led John away in handcuffs, Grace looked at her children, her heart full of both sadness and relief. She knew that the journey wasn't over, there was still healing to be done. But this was a big step. A huge weight had been lifted off their shoulders and now they could start rebuilding their lives. In the weeks that followed, Lily began to reconnect with the things she had once loved. Soccer had always been one of her favorite activities, and it was something she had stopped doing when things got harder at home. But now, with the pressure lifted, Lily started to feel the joy of playing again. She joined a local soccer team and found that she still had the passion and skill she once had. Her smile returned as she ran across the field, her old confidence slowly coming back. It was a reminder to herself that she was stronger than she had ever known. Lucas too began to thrive. The weight of fear and confusion had lifted, and he was finally able to be the carefree child he used to be. He focused on his schoolwork, made new friends and continued playing with his toys and action figures. But something had changed in him. He no longer felt like the scared little boy hiding in his room. He had found his courage and he knew now that he could stand up for what was right. The bravery he had shown when he called 911 had given him a new sense of confidence, and he carried that with him every day. The Baker family worked hard to heal together. They attended therapy sessions, where they talked about their feelings and learned how to cope with the trauma they had experienced. It wasn't always easy and there were tough days, but they stuck together. Grace became more involved with her children, making sure they felt loved and supported every day. Slowly but surely the Baker family began to rebuild their lives. They found new strength in each other, and with time they learned to trust again. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was their life, and they would make it a good one. They had survived the storm, and now they were ready to move forward with hope, love, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The months after the trial were filled with healing and change for the Baker family. They had been through so much, but through their struggles they discovered a new strength in each other. The family dynamic had shifted, and while it wasn't easy, they had learned how to be a stronger, more connected family. Grace, who had once been so focused on her work, now spent more time with her children. She made sure to listen, to be there for Lucas and Lily in ways she hadn't been able to before. She learned to pay attention to the little things like how they were feeling or when they needed help, and it made a world of difference. Grace had always loved her children, but now she understood the importance of showing that love in every moment, not just when things were easy. Lily, after everything she had gone through, began to open up again. She found comfort in reconnecting with her old hobbies like soccer, which gave her a sense of normalcy and joy. The confidence she had lost returned little by little. It wasn't always perfect, and there were days when she felt weighed down by memories of the past, but Lily knew she was growing stronger each day. She had learned that her voice mattered, and that she was worthy of respect and love. Lucas, the young boy who had called 911 in a moment of fear, had become a symbol of bravery in his own right. His courage to speak up when no one else could made all the difference. He no longer felt like the scared little boy hiding in the shadows. Instead, he was confident, knowing that he could make a difference when it mattered most. Lucas had learned the power of truth and the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter how hard it seemed. Together, the Baker family showed the world that sometimes the smallest voices could make the biggest difference. Lucas, at just 8 years old, had saved his sister's life by calling 911 when he heard her cry for help. His simple act of bravery had started a chain of events that led to John's arrest and the family's freedom. It was proof that no one, no matter how small or young, should ever underestimate their ability to make a difference. Their story became a beacon of hope for others. People in their community, and even those who didn't know them personally, were inspired by the Baker family's strength and resilience. The courage to speak out against abuse, to seek help when things seemed impossible, became a lesson for everyone who heard their story. The Baker family knew that their healing journey wasn't over. There would be hard days ahead, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and they had learned how to move forward together. They were no longer living in fear, and they no longer let the past control them. As they continued to rebuild their lives, the Baker family became a reminder that change was possible. They were living proof that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. With courage, truth, and love, they had found a way to rise above the pain and build a future that was brighter and full of promise. And in doing so, they showed others that they too could overcome anything, no matter how difficult it seemed.